The year was 1996, a year that would forever change the face of survival horror. It was the year Capcom's flagship title, Resident Evil, would launch to rave reviews and sales. The game went through an arduous 3-year development cycle and multiple versions, from a title meant for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System to a 3D first-person shooter, then finally taking form as a third-person perspective with a fixed camera angle. The game was a massive success for the studio, receiving multiple releases throughout the decade, an even more adored remake, and a franchise that has lasted for more than 2 decades. Not long after the game's release, Constantin Film bought the rights to produce a film in 1997 with screenwriter Alan B. McElroy attached. McElroy's script at the time did not mention the Umbrella Corporation or STARS, and instead focused on a special forces team, made up of the characters from the game, sent by the government to extract a group of scientists from a mansion laboratory. McElroy's script also featured all of the major monsters from the original game, though in the end his script was rejected in favor of letting the father of the zombie, George A. Romero, take over in 1998. Romero was no stranger to Resident Evil, as he had just directed a Japanese commercial for the game's sequel, Resident Evil 2, which impressed the heads at Sony to offer the established director the position. Romero noted that he had his secretary play through the entire original game and recorded it so he had a means to study it as a resource. Keep in mind, this was before Let's Plays were a common thing on the internet. In Romero's script, STARS members Chris and Jill were the lead characters and romantically involved. Barry, Rebecca, Ada Wong, and Wesker were also set to appear. In the end, though, higher-ups were dissatisfied with Romero's script. Capcom producer Yoshiki Okamoto briefly explained, Romero's script wasn't good, so Romero was fired. Romero's script can be easily found today on most script publishing sites. It was around this time that director Paul W.S. Anderson threw his hat into the ring. Anderson noted that he originally wrote what he called a terrible ripoff of Resident Evil that was titled Undead, which also included a mansion, underground laboratories, genetic experiments, and a big evil corporation. After Romero's rejection, the studio approached Anderson and had him alter his Undead screenplay to Resident Evil, announcing his hiring as writer and director in late 2000. It was with this announcement that Anderson stated the film wouldn't be tied directly into the video game series. Even after this though, the film can be seen as a loose prequel to the original series with some liberties taken. Anderson's most recent efforts at the time included the film adaptation of Mortal Kombat, an original horror film titled Event Horizon, and an action science fiction feature called Soldier. Anderson applied many of his own stylings to the film, with frenetic camera movements mixed in with over-the-top action and breakneck pacing. Resident Evil arrived in US theaters on March 15, 2002. The film would go on to be a financial success for Sony Pictures and Constantin Film, and would spawn a 6-film franchise and an upcoming reboot, though the critic and fan reception has remained mixed to negative. Unlike my video on Manhunter as an adaptation of Red Dragon, here I will not be focusing on how the film is a good adaptation of the original Resident Evil game, as I feel the argument has been done to death and will likely never die, and instead focus on how the film is, of all things, director Paul W.S. Anderson's take on the Alice in Wonderland story. The analysis will be far more interpretive than set in facts like the previous analysis. The connections between the two films isn't something that comes out of nowhere either, as actress Michelle Rodriguez noted that Anderson was directly influenced by Alice in Wonderland, specifically the 1951 animated Disney film. This comparison isn't exactly something entirely lost on people who watch the film. You have a main character named Alice, and of course, the antagonistic force of the Red Queen, but the similarities go even deeper. The analysis presented here will be a mixture of my own as well as those found in an interpretive essay titled A Comparison to Resident Evil to Alice in Wonderland, Chasing the Golden Fairy Tale Beneath the Dark Roots of a Postmodern Horror Film by Julie M. Rodriguez, which can be found through a simple Google search. Right from the moment Alice opens her eyes with a twisting camera, the viewer is watching our Alice descend into Wonderland, though at this point in the film, her journey into Wonderland hasn't truly started. As Alice gets up, she looks into a mirror, completely unaware of who she is or her purpose for being here. Mirrors play a major part in Resident Evil, with moments of Alice looking into her reflection strewn throughout the film, a visual representation of her own fragmented psyche. Alice in the Disney film looks into a mirror and sees herself reflected in a different direction, where up is now down and down is now up. Now, the true descent into Wonderland doesn't begin until our masked team of agents appear to apprehend Alice and take her to the hive below. It should be noted that during the scene, the theme of mistaken identity is brought to the forefront. Since Alice cannot remember her own name or who she is, let alone what her purpose for being at the mansion was, she's a blank slate. This remains true for some of the supporting cast we stumble upon in the film with Spence and Matt. This is an all-too-present theme in Alice in Wonderland, with Alice at one point being mistaken for a serpent, and even questioning her own identity when replying to the caterpillar's question of her identity with,
I hardly know, sir.
This is even brought up when the White Rabbit refers to Alice by the wrong name, Mary Ann. Let's turn our attention for a moment to the Special Forces team that subdues Alice, specifically on the two members Rain and JD. At first, the connection to the twins Tweedledee and Tweedledum seems completely out of the blue, but they share commonalities to each other. Both are the ones to approach Alice, with the Tweedle twins bouncing around and wanting to play with Alice, while Rain and JD instead instigate and interplay with Alice, though with serious intent. It isn't until the two display their physical prowess that their playfulness towards each other becomes apparent, and their behavior goes further than just comrades in the same squad. They have a competitive yet lighthearted attitude with each other, using their own brand of humor that works for their relationship. It's after the scene that the team gets through a difficult metal door to access the hive, similar to Alice getting past the talking doorknob to enter Wonderland. Interestingly, Rain is the one to continue through the entrance while their leader speaks. Why is this an important moment? Symbolically speaking, Rain is a living representation of the water that floods the room to get Alice past the doorknob. After she's become a giant and starts to cry, she forms colossal drops of tears, or a better connection, causes Rain to fall, which floods the door until it finally opens up. Throughout our group of Special Forces members, we see a common thread: time. From Chad Kaplan, what a name, to Rain, and even the squad leader, time is a central focus. The personification of the film's White Rabbit is spread through multiple characters. At numerous points, Kaplan routinely has his focus on time, whether it's on his wristwatch or a nearby platform clock. Rain at one point says they're late, as well as checking her watch. Even the squad leader downright says,
"Alright, we're behind schedule. So let's move it."
There are some smaller connections one could make, the three scientists in the sealed-off lab being the Queen's guards. The zombies essentially being the living embodiment of the line made famous by the Cheshire Cat,
"Most everyone's mad here."
A White Rabbit serves as our catalyst for both stories. The tea party in Alice in Wonderland is at 6 p.m., and the Hatter asks Alice a riddle about ravens. When the film begins, it's approaching dusk, and Alice sees the trees full of ravens taking off. Both Alices fall asleep before entering their version of Wonderland, and both wake up when they leave it. If you wish to include other Alice stories, even the liquor is essentially the film's own interpretation of the Jabberwocky, down to the point that Alice wields her own blade against the beast and goes snicker-snack to slay it. Taking that all in, we should put a focus on the film's most glaring connection, the Red Queen. Now, there's some obvious connections from the powerful use of the color red to the program literally being called the Queen, but there's moments that suggest an even deeper subtext. Upon one's viewing of Alice in Wonderland, one would know that the Queen of Hearts was apt to moments of rage and ruled with harsh judgments upon all those who displeased her. In the case of the animated classic, it's at the detriment to her own guards, whereas in Resident Evil, the focus is on the Hive's very own employees. From the young woman who is beheaded by the elevator, a commando in the laser room, or even demanding Alice herself remove Rain's own head, the Red Queen demands retribution in one specific way. The most obvious phrase that comes to mind being,
"Flip their heads!"
Both Alices in turn go against the commands of the Queen and swing against them, though one with a flamingo and the other with an axe. On a visual level, the color palette of the two films are a juxtaposition to each other. Alice in Resident Evil wears a blazing red against a mostly blue backdrop, while the Alice in Wonderland version wears a blue dress against red backdrops. The world of the Hive is cold with a hidden danger inside, while Wonderland has a sense of warmth to it, but similarly, it's all a facade to hide the true evil lurking inside. It's in these numerous examples and connections that I feel Paul W.S. Anderson made a conscious decision to tell his own take on the Alice in Wonderland story, all while wearing the guise of a popular video game franchise to window dress the story. While the argument over whether Anderson did a serviceable job bringing the world of Resident Evil to life will never end, one thing that I feel is undeniable is that his approach is a unique vision that I doubt any other director at the time could have replicated. While many will continue to attack Anderson for ruining their childhood, he's a director with a distinct vision behind the camera, and that vision undoubtedly has and will continue to speak to some of those who sit down and watch his films through a unique lens.